I'm going on a girls' trip with my friends, Edward. I need time to find myself again. Take care of the baby. That was the message Anna sent just 3 months after giving birth, while her husband sat at work, smiling at a picture of their newborn son. She had no idea that her text would ignite a chain of events that would leave her without a husband, without a home, and without a single penny in court. Viewers, what would you do if your wife left her newborn behind to find herself? Would you forgive her, or would you walk away forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments. In the quiet suburbs of North Carolina, Edward and Anna were the couple everyone admired. They had what seemed like the dream life, a beautiful home, a stable marriage, and now, a newborn baby boy. Friends said they were the kind of couple that restored your faith in love. But behind that peaceful home, something invisible was breaking. Edward was a man of simple joys, a 9-to-5 worker who found happiness in holding his son after a long day, in hearing the baby's soft coos, in the warmth of family. The past 3 months had been tough, yes, but to him, it was a sacred season, a time to build, to love, to grow together. Anna saw something else. Motherhood had turned her world into a blur of sleepless nights and forgotten dreams. She'd scroll through her phone at midnight, seeing her friends on yachts and wine bars glowing and free. Meanwhile, she felt like a stranger to herself, tied to a crib, a routine, and a man who no longer made her heart race. Still, Edward had no clue. That morning, he'd kissed his wife goodbye, left for work, and even texted her a photo of the baby smiling. Just a normal day. Then during a meeting, his phone buzzed. He picked it up absent-mindedly, expecting a grocery reminder or maybe a love you. But what he saw froze him to his core. I'm going on a girls' trip with my friends. Take care of the baby. I need some time for myself. He read it again, then again. Each word felt heavier than the last. Was this a joke? Was she serious? The words "take care of the baby" stung the most. She didn't say our baby, just the baby, as if she'd detached herself already. He called her, no answer, called again, straight to voicemail. A hollow silence filled the office as he stared at his phone. His co-workers chatted around him, unaware that his entire world had just cracked open. Somewhere between confusion and anger, Edward typed back the only words that felt true. Don't bother coming back. He put down the phone, but his pulse didn't slow. Something inside him said this wasn't about a trip. This was about everything she'd been hiding behind her silence. And for the first time since their wedding day, Edward realized he didn't know his wife anymore. Edward sat in his car, parked outside his office, staring blankly through the windshield. The hum of traffic outside faded into nothingness. He still couldn't believe what he'd just read. A girls' trip. 3 months after giving birth. Without a single conversation, without warning. He scrolled up the text again, hoping he'd somehow misread it. But the words didn't change. They glared back at him. Cold, thoughtless, final. I'm going on a girls' trip with my friends. Take care of the baby. I need some time for myself. His hand shook. He dropped the phone onto the passenger seat and buried his face in his palms. This wasn't Anna, not the woman who once held his hand through the toughest days of their marriage, not the woman who cried tears of joy when their son Noah was born. Something had broken inside her, or maybe something had been breaking all along, and he just never saw it. That afternoon, he couldn't focus. Every sound felt too loud, every second too slow. He left work early and drove home. When he walked through the front door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The baby monitor blinked softly on the counter, and the nanny rocked Noah in the living room, humming a lullaby. Edward forced a smile. Where's Anna? He asked, his voice unsteady. She said she was traveling for a few days, the nanny replied gently. But she didn't say where. He nodded slowly, his stomach sinking. Later that evening, after putting Noah to bed, Edward sat alone in the dimly lit living room. The walls that once held laughter now echoed with silence. He opened his phone again, searching for answers, but all he found was betrayal. Anna had just updated her social media. His heart stopped. The post showed her sitting at a rooftop bar, surrounded by her friends, dressed up, glowing, holding a glass of wine, and next to her, a man's arm draped around her shoulders. She was laughing, her head tilted back in a carefree joy Edward hadn't seen in months. The caption read, "I'm single for the week, time to pamper myself." Single for the week. Edward felt the blood rush from his face. He stared at the post, reading the comments piling underneath. Laughing emojis, heart reactions, her friends cheering her on. Something inside him snapped. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just sat there, motionless, his phone glowing in the darkness. The woman he thought he knew had just announced to the world that their marriage was nothing more than a costume she'd taken off for the weekend. Slowly, he typed out his final message to her. "Don't bother coming back, just stay where you are." He sent it. Watched the 2 blue ticks appear. And that was it. No calls, no explanations, just silence. But silence has a way of making you think. And as he sat there staring at his sleeping son, one painful thought crept into his mind, a question he'd never dared to ask before. Had everything been a lie? Edward couldn't sleep that night. He kept staring at the ceiling, the glow from his phone lighting the dark room. Anna hadn't replied to his message, not even a word. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the window pane, steady and cold, a cruel rhythm to match the heaviness inside his chest. He scrolled through their old texts, the photos they once took together, smiling at beaches, birthdays, holding little Noah for the first time. Each memory felt like a ghost now. Then, without warning, his phone buzzed. A notification. Anna had just posted a video. Edward hesitated for a moment before opening it. Part of him hoped it would be something innocent, a group dinner, maybe a beach walk. Something that would calm his racing thoughts. But the video began with loud music and flashing lights. A bar, crowded, lively, full of strangers. The camera panned across a table of women laughing, glasses clinking. Then it stopped on Anna. She was radiant. Dressed in something new, her smile wide and unguarded. She looked like a woman untouched by responsibility, unbothered by consequence. Her hair shimmered under the lights, and her laughter, that familiar melodic sound, filled the speakers. For a moment Edward just watched, frozen between disbelief and heartbreak. Then he saw it. An arm. A man's arm draped loosely around her shoulders. It was subtle, casual, intimate. The camera shook as someone cheered in the background, and Anna leaned closer to the man, laughing at something he whispered. Her hand briefly brushed his wrist, and though it lasted less than a second, it was enough. Edward's throat tightened. He replayed the clip 3 times, hoping he was wrong. But no matter how many times he watched, it didn't change. The woman he loved, the mother of his child, was somewhere far away, in a bar, with another man's arm around her, while he was home rocking their baby to sleep. He put the phone down slowly and covered his face with his hands. The silence of the house pressed in on him. In the nursery, Noah let out a soft cry. Edward stood, his legs heavy, and walked to the crib. He lifted the baby gently, pressing his forehead against the child's. "It's just you and me now," he whispered. His voice broke. As Noah settled back to sleep, Edward lingered by the crib, staring at the small rise and fall of his chest. The innocence in that tiny body contrasted painfully with the darkness churning inside him. When he finally walked back to the living room, he picked up his phone one last time. The video was still there, her laughter frozen on the screen. He turned it off and whispered to the empty room, "You left us for this?" That night, something inside Edward quietly broke, not in a burst of anger, but in the slow sinking realization that love, once taken for granted, doesn't always find its way back. The following morning, Edward woke to the sound of Noah's cries. He had barely slept, his eyes heavy and sore from the night before. The baby's soft wails filled the quiet house, and as he lifted his son from the crib, Edward felt a hollow ache spread through him, a strange mix of love and loss that words could never fully describe. He sat in the rocking chair, cradling Noah close. The baby's tiny fingers clutched his shirt, and for a moment, Edward felt something steady again, something worth holding on to. But the peace didn't last. Anna's laughter from that video still echoed in his mind. That effortless joy, that ease with a stranger's arm around her. It played on repeat in his memory, each frame sharper than the last. As the day passed, fragments of the past began to resurface, moments he'd dismissed, little cracks that suddenly seemed to form a pattern. He remembered the night, months before Noah's birth, when Anna had come home late from a prenatal yoga class. Her phone had buzzed while she showered, and when Edward glanced at it, a message flashed briefly on the screen. "I miss you too." She had brushed it off when he asked. "Oh, it's just a friend from college checking up on me," she said lightly, her smile quick and practiced. He had believed her. He wanted to believe her. Then there were the phone calls she took in the hallway, her voice low and careful. The nights she'd stay in the guest room claiming she couldn't sleep, the sudden change in her moods, one moment tender, the next distant. Back then, Edward thought it was just the pregnancy, hormones, stress, exhaustion. But now, sitting in that same house with Noah in his arms, he realized those weren't random shifts. They were signs. He stood, pacing slowly across the living room, his thoughts tangled and heavy. He remembered one evening, late in her pregnancy, when she sat beside him on the couch, quiet, distracted. "Do you ever feel like your life is already decided?" she asked softly. He had chuckled, thinking she was just tired. "What do you mean?" She looked at him for a long time before saying, "Some people are just meant to be free." It hadn't made sense then, but now it did. Anna hadn't been suffocating from motherhood. She had been slipping away long before their son was born. Edward stopped pacing and looked toward the window. The world outside looked ordinary. Kids playing, cars passing, sunlight filtering through the curtains. Yet inside, everything felt changed, unfamiliar. He whispered to himself, "How long has she been gone?" His friend Mike's words from yesterday echoed in his head. I don't think this trip was about her friends. Edward looked down at Noah's face, peaceful and trusting. A sharp pang of guilt shot through him, not for anything he'd done, but for what he was beginning to fear. What if Anna's distance hadn't just been emotional? What if the truth about his family, about his son, wasn't what he believed it was? The thought terrified him. He wanted to push it away, to bury it deep. But once doubt finds its way into a man's heart, it doesn't let go. And in that moment, Edward knew. He couldn't rest until he found out the truth. The next few days felt like walking through a fog. Edward went about his routine, feeding Noah, answering work emails, pretending to sleep. But nothing felt real. Every time he looked at his son, love and fear collided inside him. He adored that boy. Yet somewhere deep in his chest an unease began to grow, a whisper he couldn't silence. It started small, a thought he kept pushing away. Then it became a question he couldn't escape. What if Noah isn't mine? The idea haunted him. It didn't come from anger, not yet, but from confusion, from the cracks Anna had left behind. He sat one night at the kitchen table long after Noah had fallen asleep, scrolling through his phone aimlessly until he stopped on a photo of the baby. Noah smiling wide, his eyes bright and curious. Edward zoomed in, studying every detail. The shape of his nose, the curve of his lips, the eyes. Everyone always said Noah looked like his mother. "Spitting image of Anna," they'd say, smiling. Edward used to take pride in that. Now those words stung. He turned off the phone and pressed his palms to his face. "Stop it," he whispered to himself. "You're overthinking." Don't go down this road. But the thought stayed. 2 mornings later, he decided to talk to someone. Not about the suspicion, but just to unload. He called Mike. "Man, you sound wrecked," Mike said when he picked up. Edward exhaled, forcing a laugh. "I haven't been sleeping." "Anna still hasn't called?" "Not a word. Just a few pictures in the group chat with her friends." Mike paused. "Pictures?" Edward nodded, even though his friend couldn't see him. "Yeah, her and the girls, but there's this one guy that keeps showing up in the background. I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining things." "Maybe," Mike said slowly. "Or maybe you're not. Look, Ed, if something doesn't sit right with you, don't ignore it." Those words lingered long after the call ended. That night, Edward stood beside Noah's crib again, watching him sleep. The baby's small chest rose and fell rhythmically. He reached down, brushing a tiny curl off his forehead. He loved him. That much was undeniable. But love couldn't erase doubt, and the truth was beginning to matter more than comfort. By the next morning, Edward had made a decision. Quietly, almost mechanically, he searched online for a discreet DNA testing service. He found one that didn't require a doctor. Just a simple cheek swab for both father and child, results delivered confidentially. He ordered the kit. When it arrived 3 days later, he stared at the small white box on the kitchen counter for hours before opening it. His hands shook slightly as he followed the instructions. Noah giggled when Edward swabbed the inside of his cheek, unaware of the storm behind his father's eyes. After sealing the envelope and mailing it, Edward stood in the doorway, staring into the distance. Whatever the result was, he knew there was no turning back. He had crossed the line between doubt and discovery, and somewhere deep down a part of him already feared what he would find. The week that followed was pure torture. Every sunrise felt heavier than the last. Edward went through the motions, feeding Noah, replying to work emails, checking in with his sister who had come by to help sometimes, but his mind was always somewhere else, circling that single terrifying question. What if the baby isn't mine? He checked his phone constantly, waiting for the notification that would change everything. He told himself he was ready for any answer, but deep down, he knew he wasn't. Because either way, he would lose something. If Noah was his, then he had to live with the pain of Anna's betrayal, the woman he loved abandoning him and their newborn. But if Noah wasn't his, he would lose the only thing still keeping him grounded, the child he had been calling son. The 5th morning came quietly. A gentle drizzle tapped against the kitchen window while Edward sat with a cup of coffee gone cold. His phone buzzed. It was an email from the lab. For a long time, he just stared at it. His fingers trembled as he opened the message. The words were clinical, detached, just data and percentages. But one line burned into his mind. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. The mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. He didn't make a sound. Not at first. He just stood there motionless, the world spinning around him. The rain outside grew heavier, echoing against the windows like a cruel applause to his heartbreak. Then the numbness cracked. His knees weakened. He reached for the counter, gripping it for balance, his breath coming in shallow bursts. Not mine. He whispered it aloud, as if saying it could make it real. Not mine. Images flooded his mind. Noah's first smile, the first time he'd held him, the sleepless nights spent cradling him while Anna rested. All of it now rewritten by one cruel truth. Every kiss, every laugh, every whispered promise Anna had ever made came back like shards of glass. He saw her face again, heard her voice. I need to find myself. Find herself where? With who? He didn't want to know, but he needed to. That night after putting Noah to bed, Edward sat in the dark living room, staring at the glow of his phone screen. He opened Anna's contact. His thumb hovered over the call button. Then he pressed it. The phone rang longer than usual before she picked up. Her voice was casual, light. Hey, Ed. I was going to call you tomorrow. I'm heading back. Don't bother. His tone was calm, flat. She paused. What? He swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into his voice. Come and carry your baby. You have no home here anymore. Silence. Then her voice broke through, sharp and confused. Edward, what are you talking about? What's going on? He didn't answer. He simply ended the call. The decision had been made, and this time there was no message to unsend, no words to take back. 3 days later, Anna returned. The same driveway she'd left behind with laughter and perfume now felt cold, almost foreign. The autumn wind rustled through the trees as her taxi rolled to a stop in front of the house. She expected Edward to come out, maybe angry, maybe emotional, but ready to talk. Instead, the front porch was empty. Her heart raced. Something felt off. Dragging her suitcase behind her, she climbed the steps and rang the doorbell. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Finally, she used her key and pushed the door open. The silence inside was deafening. The once warm, lived-in space looked stripped of comfort. The walls were bare, the shelves empty, and the scent of her favorite candles was gone. Her eyes darted around in confusion until they landed on the boxes, her belongings, packed neatly, labeled in Edward's handwriting. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Edward, she called softly, stepping further in. Edward, where's Noah? Then she heard footsteps. Edward appeared at the end of the hallway, his face unreadable. He wasn't angry, and somehow that frightened her more than if he had been. He looked calm. Too calm. Where's Noah? She repeated, her voice trembling now. He's asleep, Edward said quietly. You can see him after we talk. Her throat went dry. She forced a nervous smile. Okay, we can talk. I know you're mad, but... He cut her off, reaching for the envelope on the table beside him, the one he'd been staring at for days. You don't need to explain. Just read this. Anna frowned, hesitating, then took the paper from his hand. Her eyes skimmed the contents, and then froze. Her lips parted, the color drained from her face. Edward, what is this? You tell me, he said flatly. Because according to that test, Noah isn't mine. She shook her head instantly. That's impossible. You're making a mistake. I didn't make anything, Edward snapped, his voice finally cracking through the calm. I spent 6 years believing I knew who you were. I held that baby. I looked into his eyes every night. And you let me live a lie. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't plan this. I swear, Edward, it's not what you think. Oh, it's exactly what I think, he said bitterly. And what I know. Anna reached out, but he stepped back. You left, he said coldly. 3 months after giving birth, you decided you needed to find yourself. You left your baby, my supposed son, with a nanny and a text message. And now you want to tell me this was all a mistake? Her tears fell freely now. Please, Edward, don't do this. I love you. I love our family. There is no family, he said quietly, his eyes steady. You ended that when you walked out the door. Anna's knees weakened. She sank onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. Edward turned away, his voice low but final. Take your things. Take the baby. And go. The words cut through the silence like a blade. For the first time since she met him, Anna saw no trace of love in his eyes. Only the hollow ache of a man who had nothing left to lose. Edward didn't waste a single day after Anna left. The moment the door closed behind her, he stood still in the empty living room, his heart numb, but his mind clear. He had spent weeks drowning in confusion, pain, and questions. But now, he had the answer. The truth. The woman he loved had betrayed him. The child he called his own wasn't his. There was nothing left to fix. By the next morning, Edward was sitting across from Mr. Harris, a respected family lawyer with a calm, steel-like demeanor. I want a divorce, Edward said firmly. Mr. Harris nodded, sliding a document across the desk. "We'll file immediately. You have every right to end this. And with the DNA results, we'll make sure she doesn't get a cent she doesn't deserve." Edward's eyes hardened. "She walked out on her family. Then she lied to me for months. I'm done." Within 48 hours, the divorce papers were filed. And when the summons reached Anna's hands, she panicked. She called him endlessly. He didn't answer. She sent messages, emails, even begged through mutual friends. Nothing worked. So she did what desperate people often do. She fought back. Her lawyer filed a counterclaim, demanding child support and spousal maintenance, arguing that Edward had abandoned his responsibilities and emotionally distressed her after childbirth. It was a cruel twist. The very woman who deceived him was now painting herself as the victim. 2 months later, they met again. Not in their cozy living room, but in the cold echo of a courtroom. Anna sat across from him, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Her once perfect confidence had dimmed, but pride still lingered in her posture. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Anna's lawyer spoke first, his tone smooth and deliberate. "Your Honor, my client is a new mother who suffered from emotional instability after giving birth. The defendant's abrupt decision to file for divorce left her without support. She seeks fair compensation for the well-being of the child." Edward didn't react. He simply looked forward, calm, collected. When his turn came, his lawyer rose slowly, his voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, the petitioner, Mr. Edwards, did not abandon anyone. In fact, the respondent abandoned her husband and infant to go on a personal trip, leaving behind only a text message. Furthermore, a paternity test proves beyond doubt that the child is not biologically his." Gasps filled the courtroom. Anna's face went white. The judge leaned forward. "You have evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Harris replied, holding up a sealed document, a certified DNA report. The judge scanned the pages in silence. Then he looked up. "In light of this evidence," he said firmly, "this court finds that Mr. Edwards has no legal or financial obligation toward the child. The request for child support is denied. Divorce granted." Anna broke. Her tears came fast, her voice trembling. "Edward, please. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please don't leave me like this." But Edward's expression didn't change. He stood, buttoned his suit, and spoke quietly, almost kindly. "You already left me, Anna. You just didn't realize it until now." And then he walked away, this time for good. Outside the courthouse, the sun felt different, warmer, freer. The wind carried no bitterness, only peace. Edward had lost everything he thought he had, but in truth, he'd finally reclaimed himself. Anna's world fell apart piece by piece. The courtroom had been her last hope, the one place she believed she could twist the truth, cry her way back into sympathy, maybe even guilt Edward into taking her back. But when the gavel struck that final time, the echo of the judge's words carved her fate into stone. Divorce granted, no child support, no alimony. The man she had once taken for granted had walked away, calm, dignified, untouchable. Days turned into weeks. Her friends, the ones who'd cheered her on during that girls' trip, started to disappear. They had their own lives, their own image to protect. None of them wanted to be associated with a woman whose scandal had quietly circulated in whispers that she'd cheated on her husband and lost everything because of it. The man she'd gone away to find herself with never answered her calls again. He had been a fleeting thrill, nothing more. Now, Anna sat alone in a small bare apartment. The walls felt too close, the silence too loud. Noah played on the floor beside her, his laughter innocent and pure, a sound that cut straight into her heart. Every time she looked at him, she saw Edward's face. Not in resemblance, but in memory. The way he used to hold the baby at night, humming softly, promising a life full of love and protection. A life she had destroyed with her own hands. One night, Unable to bear the guilt anymore, Anna wrote him a letter. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. More of a confession. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote. "I just want you to know that you were a good man, better than I ever deserved. I thought I was missing something in life, but it turns out I was just too blind to see what I already had." She never sent the letter. It stayed folded in a drawer, unread, gathering dust like all the dreams she'd thrown away. Edward, meanwhile, had found a strange kind of peace. He poured his energy into his work, his hobbies, his own healing. On weekends, he volunteered at a local shelter, not because he needed distraction, but because he wanted purpose again. One evening, months later, as he watched the sunset from his balcony, his sister joined him with a gentle smile. "You did the right thing, you know," she said softly. Edward nodded slowly. "Maybe, but it still hurts." "Of course it does," she replied. "But pain is proof that you cared, and peace is proof that you've moved on." He looked out at the fading horizon, the last light melting into gold. For the first time in a long while, he smiled. There were no more unanswered questions, no more texts that tore him apart. Just silence. Beautiful, healing silence. And in that silence, Edward found what Anna had gone searching for: himself.